Professor Diaz here, and in this video I'm going to introduce the concept of market equilibrium. I'm not going to say everything about market equilibrium, but I'll develop this idea over the next couple of videos. So market equilibrium is when we bring supply and demand together. But before we do that, I want to talk about this word equilibrium for just a minute. Equilibrium is a word that means balanced, right? Equal, it's sustained. We think about equilibriums in all kinds of different cases. There's for example, environmental equilibrium, right? When a new species is introduced, or as there's a new plant that grows, or people build a city, or people move into a space, the environment has to grow to a new equilibrium, right? A new balance. Another example, let's say you're filling up a barrel with a hose, but there's some holes drilled on the side and water's also running out. As you fill up that barrel, the water level is increasing, but the water level is also decreasing. And depending on the flow rates, you will hit an equilibrium where the same equal amount of water is going out as is coming in, and the water will no longer be going up or down, right? Unless you increase the water going in or increase the water going out, or decrease, right? So equilibrium is this idea of balance. When we're talking about supply and demand, we're going to use the same graph that we've been talking about for both supply and demand. Remember, on this graph, we've got on the y-axis price, and on the x-axis quantity. Now, we're going to put these two curves together. So I'm going to put demand here, and I'm going to put supply here. Now, you may be asking, if you're just curious, why do sometimes the lines curved? You know, you may see a line that looks like this. You may see a line that's straight that looks like this. It doesn't really matter because we're just talking about the aggregate supply. So, I mean, technically a supply curve could look something like this, right? We're going to do an example aggregate demand curve later on, so don't worry about that too much. For a lot of the examples later on in this class, we're going to use a straight supply curve and a straight demand curve. But for now, I like the look of the curved supply curve and the curved demand curve, and there's a reason for that, but we're not going to get into it in this video. So if we put the supply and the demand together, which remember, demand is the same for down, right? And supply is the same for up supply, right? So it's going up. That's how you can remember those two curves, shorthand. When you put those two curves together, the place that they cross is what we call equilibrium. So this would be the equilibrium price. We'll call that P1. And this would be the equilibrium quantity. We'll call that Q1. Remember, when I say Q1 or P1, that doesn't mean anything. It just means some arbitrary number, so that later I can say P2 if I want and be talking about a different point on the y-axis. So drawing a line over, that would be P1. Drawing a line down, that would be Q1. Where they cross, this is what we call market equilibrium. Now I'm going to try and demonstrate to you how free markets will tend towards equilibrium. Adam Smith was the founder of this idea back in the 1700s, and he said that in general, the government should stay out of price manipulation, right? Remember, part of the definition of a market is that it's a willing buyer and a willing seller to make transactions at an arm's length. If you want to go sell something for a lot of money, you can. If you want to sell it for a little bit of money, you can. If you want to go buy something, that's your choice. Adam Smith said the government should be laissez-faire, should stay out of this and should let the market operate. And Adam Smith said there was something called the invisible hand that would adjust prices, right? So to talk about how the invisible hand would work, let's look at something here. Let's say that this equilibrium price is about $5. So let's put some let's just put some hash marks on here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll put them every 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, so where's our equilibrium price? It looks like it's about like $5, say, and 80 cents. Okay, so that's market equilibrium. Let's say that a supplier decides, hey, I'm going to sell this good for $7. Okay, we can draw a line at the $7 line. and say, okay, if the price in this market, which is all the aggregate of willing suppliers and willing demanders at all the various prices, looks like this, how many people are willing to buy this good, demand this good at $7? Well, there's some, right? There's this many. We can call that Q sub D, right? This would be the quantity demanded of this good or service, right? At $7, only QD would be willing to buy this product. But how many people would be willing to sell this product at $7? Well, coming down, we can call that quantity supplied, Q sub S, right? Here's the problem. At $7, there's going to be a lot of people, Q sub S, willing to supply, and not that many people, Q sub D, willing to demand, right? Which, in this case, you could measure the distance between these two lines, and this would be considered a surplus, right? Because we've got too many suppliers and not enough demanders, so we'd have a surplus. Now, what would happen if there's a surplus? That's going to drive price down, right? Naturally, that's going to drive price down. And how far down? To equilibrium, right? So if the price is set too high, the government doesn't have to come in. There doesn't have to be lawmakers. The natural forces, the invisible hand, as Adam Smith called it, will drive prices down to this balancing point, okay? Conversely, what will happen if suppliers set the price below market equilibrium, right? What happens if, say, suppliers set the price at $4, okay? Well, will anybody be willing to sell this product at $4? Sure, this many people will, right? So we'll call that Q sub S, because that's the quantity willing to supply. And how many people are going to want to buy at this price? A lot, right? $4 is a good deal for this thing, whatever this thing is, right? So Q sub D. Now we've got a problem because a lot of people want to buy Q sub D and not that many people want to sell for $4, Q sub S. So again, per Adam Smith, the invisible hand is going to drive that price up, right? It's going to drive that price up. Where is it going to drive that price up to? How high? To market equilibrium. Because if it goes too high, then you're going to have the other forces pushing it down. So you've got forces pushing it down, and you've got forces pushing it up. And this is why, more or less, markets hit equilibrium fairly quickly and fairly easily. There becomes an equilibrium price that people are willing to sell for and people are willing to buy for, right? Now, there can be different factors that can change that. We're going to talk about that in a future video. By the way, when you've got prices that are set too low, what happens? We call this a shortage. Okay, the distance between these 2 points is a shortage because we have this many people that want it and this many people willing to supply it. Not enough. Therefore, we have a shortage. So shortages will raise prices. Shortages will raise prices to equilibrium, and surpluses will drop prices to equilibrium. Because again, if there's a surplus, then suppliers have to lower price to get their product moving because there's a surplus, there's too many. And when there's a shortage, suppliers are going to raise their price to meet demand and get profits, which will, of course, raise price. So everything will ultimately end up at this equilibrium. And so the equilibrium in this case will be here at about 580. Equilibrium price is 580, and equilibrium quantity would be here at Q, what we call Q sub E. So this is a basic introduction to market equilibrium. And I mentioned shortages and surpluses as well, and how those kind of move price to this equilibrium point. In the next video, I will talk about changes in market equilibrium.